My name's Stephen Ford. I'm a Bowen therapist and I work in an area called Stockport, just outside Greater Manchester in northern England. This short video is an introduction to a series of demonstrations of somatic exercises that I routinely teach to my therapy clients, and I'm providing the videos primarily for their benefit so they can act as a reminder of these techniques that I've shown them. However, as these videos are being posted on YouTube, I thought I should also put a brief explanation in place for anybody else who might happen to come across them. So although the focus is primarily on somatics, I thought I should provide a little bit of information on the Bowen Technique, as that's the primary therapeutic modality that I use. Bowen Technique, contrary to what you might have heard, is not faith healing, and it's not an energy healing system such as Reiki. It's a very practical, hands-on therapy, albeit one which by and large uses a lighter touch than techniques such as shiatsu or sports massage, for instance. Although Bowen Technique and somatics are not the same therapy, they do have a number of elements that they have in common. How these fit together, I would use a metaphor. If you think of a modern car, if you were servicing a modern car, working on the engine, the bodywork, then you're using a very physical approach, and that would be something akin to sports massage. If you're working on electrical systems within the car, then that would be something similar to the Bowen Technique, whereas Bowen Technique directly stimulates the nervous system to encourage muscles to move and relax in an appropriate way. Somatics, on the other hand, would be rather like resetting the car's software, turning it off and back on again, and hopefully rebooting it into a way that works more appropriately. In Bowen Technique, we use a term, the sustaining muscle spasm. This refers to the primary problem that sits at the root of the injury or ailment that has manifested itself. The sustaining muscle spasm is often hidden behind multiple layers of other issues or secondary spasms, locked joints, locked muscles, etc. And these secondary forms often occur by way of a compensation. So, for example, if you sprain an ankle, the initial pain of the ankle sprain will cause you to limp and favour the leg to avoid putting load on it. As your ankle heals and the pain reduces, because your body has now learnt a slightly different way of walking, often when the pain and the ankle are better, you continue to walk in a slightly unbalanced manner, and over time this can create loads elsewhere, for instance in knees, hips, back and even the neck. So when a client presents possibly suffering from headaches, neck ache or something similar, we may well examine that initial place, but more often than not, our examination and our research into the condition will result in us exploring other parts of the body, the pelvis, the lower back, and ultimately we may find ourselves down to the ankle, which was the original cause of the problem. The ankle hasn't recovered properly, isn't articulating properly. There may be work required at that level, but more often than not, we find that a compensation eventually settles somewhere along the spine. Because the spine is a complex structure and it's extremely adaptable, sometimes in ways that we don't want it to adapt, we often find that areas of the spine or the neck become the seat of the adaptation that the body has taken on to deal with the initial problem. Somatic exercises are a second way that I find very useful in helping the body to release that core problem. And in somatics, the phrase is used as sensory motor amnesia, and this largely refers to the same issue. The sensory motor, as I'll show in a few diagrams in this presentation, relate essentially to the way the body sends messages to and from remote points back to the brain and back from the brain to the remote points. And sometimes the brain forgets that it has learnt a certain compensation and it takes that new compensation as being the correct way of moving. And we use somatics as a way of re-educating the brain and the body to move in the way it was intended to. The information that I'm about to present isn't necessary in order for you to benefit from Bowen Technique or Somatics. So for those who don't want to sit through the rest of this, I'm going to present just the most important aspects of how to approach the somatic exercises when you're following the videos. As I explain in the various demonstration videos, it's very important that the movements are not approached as you might approach an exercise in the gym. It's not about effort, it's not about force, it's not about strength. Remember, the aim is to re-educate the body, and the primary way that we do that is by utilizing our attention so that we become fully aware of how a movement is initiated and created by our nervous system and our musculature. In order to get the most benefit from the somatic exercises in the shortest period of time, I recommend the following. If you're using the video examples, please review them several times to make sure you're clear about the nature of the movement. Be very precise and exact in the way you carry out the movement. Never use force in order to make a movement happen if it doesn't feel that it wants to happen. Relax fully after each movement. And by relax, that means their entire body should feel as soft and as loose as possible. This is why you need to take your time with the movement to ensure you achieve the level of relaxation that's required to maximize the benefits of the movement. Don't rush through the movements. Repeat each movement about 5 times each session, remembering to relax fully between each repetition. Because this is an educational process, repetition helps immensely. So do a session at least every other day, at least for the first week. Because concentration and relaxation are paramount, it's very important that you arrange a quiet space where you won't be disturbed while you go through the practice. This shouldn't be too difficult, because if you're just working on one particular joint or limb, the entire session should take no more than 4 or 5 minutes. And finally, if you experience any unusual pain or discomfort whilst carrying out these exercises, then you should stop them immediately. If you're not already in the care of a qualified therapist or a medical practitioner, then you should seek their guidance at the earliest opportunity. Developing the awareness that's required can take a little practice. One of the most important moments to learn to focus on is the very instant that you initiate a movement. So for example, if you're raising your elbow, you try and spot which muscle fires first. Is it your shoulder? Is it your bicep? Is it a muscle in your spine? It might even be something remote like a muscle in a leg or your pelvis. When you first start doing these exercises, it isn't at all unusual to find initiating the movement to be quite difficult. Even though the movement in your own mind you think should be quite easy to do, and it probably is, when you try and learn how the movement is initiated, this is when you discover that the neurology isn't communicating very well with the musculature. So you may find, for example, that one side of the body is easy to do and you have a nice, smooth, easy action, whereas the other side of the body may be difficult to do, difficult to initiate, and when you do move, the limb may move in quite a jerky and disorganized fashion, and that shows that you've found a problem area that needs working on. If you're still with us, well done. And now we're very briefly going to look at a few of the anatomical factors that influence both somatics and the use of the Bowen technique. I think most people have an understanding of the idea that the brain sends signals down the spinal column and from the spinal column to muscles in order to create movement, and these signals from the spinal column pass through motor nerves. I think, however, there's less familiarity with the function of the sensory system, both in terms of the various sensory receptors spread around the body, and actually the importance of the sensory system to our overall muscular function and our neurology. This diagram better illustrates the circularity in communication between both motor and sensory nerve systems. You'll see highlighted what are referred to as the Golgi tendon organ and muscle spindles. Both of these particular items are stress and velocity indicators that tell the body and tell the brain how quickly muscles are moving, whether they're reaching the end of their current limit of range or whether they're travelling too quickly. In part, it's the effect of these two systems that can reduce the effectiveness of stretching if they determine that the muscle is being pushed too far too quickly. It's not a coincidence that the Bowen technique utilises many moves over the tendons and the belly of the muscle where these two sensors are located. One of the effects of the circularity of the design of this nervous layout is for the system to create automatic responses. This occurs when one of the sensory units perceives an input. It then sends a signal via the sensory nerves to the spine, which is then relayed back via the motor nerves to a motor muscle, creating a movement. This type of response is easily illustrated by the common clinical knee tap test as illustrated. During this test, a small hammer hits a tendon below the kneecap, the patella tendon, and this creates a dual response. Firstly, the quadricep muscle, that's the groups on top of the thigh, tense, and at the same time the hamstring muscles, the muscles on the back of the thigh, relax. This causes the foot to kick forward without any conscious effort on behalf of the subject. It's these closed circuit communication loops that allow for the creation of the sensory motor amnesia that we seek to address through somatics and to some degree the Bowen technique. I hope all of that has shed some light on the ideas behind somatics and the Bowen technique. If you have any questions, please feel free to enter them in the comments below or get in touch with me via my website. Details are above. Thank you.